heading towards Longlands Street in Bradford, where a man by the name of Abraham Johnson used to live here in the year 1881 with his wife and daughter. Now, this poor chap was enslaved in his teenage years in Zanzibar. He was born in 1840 and he was taken to India, China and various other places as a slave. The strange thing about Abraham Johnson is he escaped slavery, ended up in Bradford, died in Armley jail. Now I'll quickly show you Longlands Street because it's a strange street, to be honest. So we're going back to around about 1881 where he used to live here. And there you have High Point, and Longlands Street actually cuts across those houses there and continues. Now if you look at the maps going back to 1881, around about that time there used to be a couple of burial grounds here and also Westgate Baptist Chapel. So do watch this video towards the end. I'm going to take you to a sad site of 𝗴𝗃𝗃𝗲's grave where he's buried. And before I start the tale, I'm going to take you to the Undercliff Cemetery where there's a bit of a connection. I've just arrived at the Undercliff Cemetery in Bradford. I want to show you the resting place of a local artist by the name of John Sorden. Now the reason why I'm going to show you his grave is because he was into his watercolour portraits and he started doing paintings of local characters of Bradford, 𝗴𝗿𝗃𝗲𝗏s and street characters. And one of the characters he painted was Abraham Johnson. Now here is the resting place of John Sorden. Unfortunately it's very hard to read. I'm guessing it's a family grave, but his name is mentioned there. The Sorden family. So in total I think he collated around about 358 portraits, watercolour portraits, and some were unattributed and some were not finished. So around 1921, when he was getting slightly older, he decided to give away the whole collection to Bradford City Museum, which I believe is the Bowling Museum, which opened around about 22nd of September 1915. Now I tried my best to actually photograph these portraits, or at least try to photograph Abraham Johnson's portrait. I asked Bowling Hall Museum, but these watercolour portraits are so sensitive to light and they're so fragile, as you can imagine, so I wasn't really allowed to do it. And there is a portrait of Abraham Johnson on the website as well, which you can purchase, but I don't think it's on sale at the moment. So what I did, I purchased a book which I've got here. I'll just pick it up. It's called Street Characters of Victorian City, John Soden's Bradford, and it's edited by Dr. Gary Firth. Now this book is quite special and it's not easy to get hold of, especially it's been signed by him as well, by Dr. Gary Firth. But what I want to show you is the portrait of Abraham Johnson. And there he is, probably the only representation of the character, and it's done by this fella, John Sorden. Have a quick read there. Abraham Johnson was one of the half a dozen black men in Victorian Bradford. He was 40 years of age and was a native of Zanzibar, where he was enslaved as a teenager. His slavery took him to China, Japan and India, where he escaped and worked his passage to England. He found work in John Maxwell's flax mill in Leeds. That's a slight detail of Abraham Johnson. So let's head to 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 Cemetery in Leeds and find his resting place. So here I am at the Leeds Catholic Cemetery. First impressions, wow. Not been here before. I needed a passport to get into Leeds. But let's go and find the grave of Abraham Johnson. Now this cemetery was opened in 1895 and it's a Catholic cemetery. So Abraham Johnson was buried as a Catholic, so we'll discuss that later on. And to be honest, there's not much information about Abraham, so I've kind of pieced stuff together. But a big shout out to the 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 Cemetery staff who really helped me out to locate the grave of Abraham Johnson. Fantastic staff, really helpful. And a big shout out to Danny Fryer, one of our subscribers who brought this story to my attention. So when I first saw this story, I thought, wow, it's incredible how this guy, this poor man, must have what this poor man has gone through. So let's have a quick look around here, I'll give you an idea. So section B303 is where he is resting. Apologise for the shadow. I had to change my jacket because the sun's out. Pretty warm, but can't complain. As you can see, quite a few have been weathered away. Right, let's have a look. Ah, there you go. So this area has been, as you can see, freshly cut because the staff knew I was coming over to film the grave of Abraham Johnson. Now this is where he is. I'll put a listing in the description because it's not easy to read. Because from the records I've been given, there are 13 people buried, most likely in a pauper's grave. Only 10 have the names on the headstone, and poor Abraham Johnson is not mentioned. But this is definitely the spot where he is buried. Incredible journey. So a bit about Abraham Johnson. Like I said, he was born in Zanzibar around 1848. He was enslaved as a teenager, and his enslavement took him to China, Japan and India. He escaped slavery in Southeast Asia before working as a crew member on board of a ship that brought him to Liverpool. Abraham Johnson was living in Leeds from around 1864 until 1868, when he returned to sea as a crew member on a ship travelling from Liverpool across to Indian Ocean and back. There is actually an Anglican cathedral of Christ Church built in Stone Town, the old part of Zanzibar city, in the place where the biggest slave market of Eastern Africa operated. His altar was placed exactly where the slaves for sale were whipped. On the floor amongst the benches there are black cobblestones as a remembrance of the dungeons used for slaves in the basement. Outside the cathedral there's a stone monument showing 4 people enchained by the necks as a way of reproducing the way in which the slaves were offered to buyers. Those chains are the actual chains used at the time. Now you're probably asking me, how come he ended up in 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗲 jail? Now, from the prison records, I've checked that his street name is actually Abraham Johnson, but his official name is 𝗴𝗿𝗃𝗃𝗲 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗲. So that's another twist to the tale. So he used to go around in the streets of Bradford begging, and at times a bit of a nuisance, according to the police records, the prison records, sorry. And he's been recorded a couple of times on the records. And he actually died on the 13th of March 1910 and was buried on the 17th of March, and he was said to be around about 70 years of age. So I'm not quite sure how long he stayed in prison, because he's mentioned quite a few times in the documents. And a bit about the funeral. The priest who conducted the burial was Father Thomas Charles Nicholson, a curate at the Holy Family Church in 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗲, just down the road from 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗲 jail. So most likely he conducted the funeral because Abraham died in Holy Family Parish, and quite possibly because Father Nicholson acted as a Catholic chaplain to 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗲 jail. So I have here a Yorkshire Evening Post article dated Friday the 8th of October 1909 under the section Sentences at Bradford Quarter Sessions, where it says Abraham 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗲 𝗫𝗍, a coloured man, incorrigible, rogue and vagabond, 3 months. So it looks like society had just written him off. So there you go, folks. Bit of a sad tale how this chap went from slavery, escaped slavery, and God knows what he's been through. Ended up in pauper's grave amongst 12 other people, and his name is not even mentioned on the stone. Quite possibly he was a poor man, didn't really have much of a family, so a lot of the times the graves are not marked. So thanks for watching, I'll see you on the next vlog.